This is a review of the Nikon N8008, a camera which sold between 1988 and 1991 and who shared a lot of tech with its big brother, the Nikon F4. In fact, it had a couple features that the F4 didn't even have.
I'm going to start off with a review of the controls of the camera. Then I'll talk about its history and my history with it, my likes and dislikes, and finally I will show you some pictures I've taken through the years.
We're going to start off on the top plate right side, and you're going to find a switch with positions of off, on, and on with various beeper sounds for various functions of the camera. After that, you find the exposure compensation button, and beside that, the first of two film rewind buttons. You have to push both buttons to get the film to rewind. Under that, you'll find the LCD panel, and beside the LCD panel, you'll find the command wheel. Next up, you find the shutter release button, and on top of the pentaprism, you'll find the hot shoe, which does support TTL flash. On the top plate left side, you're going to find the following six buttons: the ISO button, the drive mode button, the multiple exposure button, which also doubles as a film rewind button, the shooting mode button, the meter button, and the self timer button. On the front plate right side, you have the self timer LED, the depth of field preview button, and the autofocus lock button. On the front plate left side, you have the lens release, the focus mode selector with settings for continuous, single servo, and manual mode, the remote control terminal, and around the corner, the camera back release. On the camera back, you'll find the film cartridge window, the AE lock lever, and the viewfinder illumination button. On the bottom plate, you have the battery holder and tripod socket. You use 7 buttons, the command wheel, and the LCD to set up most of the functions of the camera. You hold down the button and use the command dial to iterate through the options available from that particular button. For the drive button, you have single shot, continuous high, and continuous low. For the shooting mode button, your options are aperture priority, shutter priority, program dual, program high, and manual mode. The options for the meter are matrix meter or center weighted. You can set the self-timer delay between 2 and 30 seconds. Also, there's a 2F setting, which means 2 frames. It will fire 1 frame after 10 seconds and a second frame after 5 seconds later. Looking in the viewfinder, you find straight ahead the focusing brackets and around that a 12mm circle. Everything inside the circle is weighted 75% when in center weighted mode. After that, across the bottom from left to right, you see the focusing indicators, the exposure mode indicators, the shutter speed, the aperture, the meter/exposure compensation index, the exposure compensation indicator, and finally the flash ready LED. When this camera came out, it was Nikon's top spec non-pro camera. It was considered the little brother to the Nikon F4 because it had a lot of the functions of the F4, but in a smaller, lighter package. That's not to say it's a particularly light camera. Even though it's got plastic body panels, it's got a metal structure underneath and it's powered by 4 AA batteries. It's actually a pretty heavy camera. It's also pretty short and stocky. The shutter speed has settings from bulb to a class-leading 1/8000th of a second. The incredibly accurate meter allows exposure compensation plus or minus 5 stops in 1/3 stop increments. Other specifications include a flash sync of 1/250th of a second, a full information viewfinder, a depth of field preview, AE lock, and autofocus lock, as well as a big bright viewfinder. This camera has buttons for setting up all its functions, and that's important because if you had to navigate through a menuing system to change settings that were several layers deep, it would take longer to get to your picture. So with this camera, for instance, if you want to change your meter, hold down the meter button, turn the dial. Boom, you just switched from matrix to center weighted. Or if you want to change your drive mode to be a faster continuous drive, drive button, turn it. Boom, very quick. It will also mount up and center weighted meter non-autofocus Nikon lenses. So this is a 100mm Series E lens I have, and it works fine on the camera with obviously manual focus.
and center weighted metering, and it'll do aperture priority as well. So you adjust the aperture and it will adjust the shutter. One of the things that the 8008 and the f4 share is a really awesome flash system. The system meters the foreground and background and adjusts the flash exposure, taking into account the background illumination, so that when the picture is exposed, the background doesn't go dark. In this way, the foreground looks great and the background looks great. Now I'm going to talk about a couple things that this camera does even better than the f4. The first one is it's got what's called a program shift ability. So in program mode, the camera picks the shutter and the aperture like it does in most cameras that have a program mode. But in this camera, it shows you what the shutter and the aperture are, both in the viewfinder and on the LCD. And what you can do is, when you're seeing the aperture and the shutter speed, you can rotate this command wheel and it'll shift them, maintaining the proper exposure. But for instance, it would slow down the shutter speed and close the aperture just a little bit, or do the opposite of that, so that you have the correct exposure for the picture, but you're able to change the shutter speed and the aperture with just turning this dial. The f4 does not have that because the f4 has all dials, so there would be no way they could do that. So that's a very nice feature of this camera. Another advantage this camera has over the f4 is it can do shutter speeds out to 30 seconds. Of course, because you're picking the shutter speed and you're just rotating this dial, right? So it can go all the way out to 30 seconds, which is pretty impressive. And the f4 has an actual dial with ticks on it, and I forget how far out it goes, but not 30 seconds. Another thing is it has a shortcut to get you back to the program mode. So no matter what you've set, you can just press the mode and drive button for 3 seconds together and it'll switch it over back to program mode. Another thing is the self-timer function on this camera. You can set the time to anywhere from 2 seconds to 30 seconds. On the f4 you can't do that. And you can also have this camera take 2 pictures with the self-timer. One's after 10 seconds and one's about 5 seconds later, always, if you have that set. Or it'll of course do manual mode. I got the camera in 1988, right after this model came out, and I used it in college where I worked on the newspaper. Every week working at the newspaper, I shot many rolls of film through the camera. We shot sports, theater, pretty much everything going on at the college was shot through this camera, and we had a couple others as well. And it never let me down. We shot mostly black and white, and we also developed it and printed our own pictures. So it was really a fabulous job. We had a wonderful time. But this camera was used every week, day in and day out. I don't know. I would love to have a shutter fire count on this on it to know how many rolls of film were run through this thing. And it's in really great shape. It's got just a couple little nicks here or there. I'm sure it was dropped many times. We used it for studio work. It's just a fabulous camera today as it was then. It's a really great camera, and if you check eBay or Craigslist, you're going to find it's very, very inexpensive as well. I found examples on eBay just now for, $38, $50. It's got a lot of functionality. It's easy to shoot. You can put it in program mode if you want. You can use the program shift. You can use the aperture priority, shutter priority. It's really easy to get great pictures with this camera, especially with the flash system. Pick up a flash that's dedicated for this, like the SB24, and you really can't go wrong with this camera.
Here's just a few pictures I took with the camera back in 1991 when I took a trip to Yosemite Valley. It was all shot on Kodachrome slide film, and I had a polarizer on the camera.
Thanks for watching my video, and if you liked it, hit the like button and think about subscribing. Also, if you have some ideas for other cameras you'd like me to review, leave some comments down below. Thanks again. Uh-oh, look at that shit. Oh, jeez. This camera has buttons for setting up all the functions on it. That doesn't sound right. Okay, lost the camera again. Damn it. There it is.
It's also pretty short and stocky, like Scott.